Welcome, everyone, to Hello, Ernest at the Kitchen Table, connecting writers and readers. I am Jan Pratt, the author of several children's picture books and also the author of a series of yoga lesson plans for kids.
And I am Gaga Gabarty. I'm a co-author with Judy Lee Butler. Together, we write the Phoebe Cornell Mystery Series. Join us for every episode as we connect readers to your next great read. Tom Carpenter, welcome to the kitchen
Good
table.
morning.
How are
How are
you?
you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. Thank you for coming and on board to join us today. We appreciate you giving up some of your time. I know you're writing constantly, and we appreciate it. Hey,
I'm happy to be here.
okay, all right. Well, this is all about Hello, Tom at the kitchen table. And what we're really after here and what we're really looking for is getting to know the person behind all of the books that you write. And so that gives us like almost 30 minutes to just kind of figure it all out. So very quick and very succinct. So we appreciate it. Tom, why don't we start at the like the 10,000 foot level? And so the genre you write in is what?
Urban fantasy, I would say would be the broad umbrella of what I write in. And I would say with the kind of subgenre of magical academy.
All right,
Yeah.
good. How did you get there? I mean, did you have like an experience, a memorable event, something that linked you over to writing in that genre?
So, and I have been doing mostly in this genre for the past 35 books now. Before that, I was a bit of explorer. My first trilogy was post-cyberpunk dystopia, and then I went into a YA dystopia, and then I did historical alternate fiction, and then fantasy history, historical fantasy. So I think at that point, I was kind of learning that it was very difficult to bring fans along from one series to another, especially when I was making such big jumps. I wasn't making literal lateral jumps like, maybe within a genre and just doing slightly different. And so I wanted to tackle something that I knew I could write in for a while. I wanted to stay in the same genre because that's really the best way to build a fan base.
Right.
So, I kind of had to decide, where was I going to be happy for a long period of time? And with those things in mind was how I got to writing The Hundred Halls, which is about a magical university. In modern times, a very quick way to say would be like a Harry Potter for adults, but the Hundred Halls is each hall teaches a different kind of magic, so that gives me and with 100 of them, that gives me a lot of different things to play with. And the way I do it is I write a 5-book series around a particular hall, each book being 1 year of school for those characters going through it. And right now I'm on the 8th series of the Hundred Halls universe, and it's having that idea back then about how to get into urban fantasy and then be able to write a long series. I think it's worked out very well that I structured it that way because it's given me a lot of substance to use, a lot of grit in the for the pearl, because otherwise I think like I would have given up a long time ago if I would have gotten bored, because if the writer is bored, that's the kiss of death for a series.
Right. Yes, exactly. But how did you pick that genre? Did you have an out-of-body experience that took you mentally over there and I can write this? How's that all work? What's your thinking on that?
You know, I think, yeah, I think it's, you know, I have a huge background in, you know, role play games and stuff like that.
Oh,
You
okay,
know, read a lot of fantasy, so I'm very
sure,
familiar with it. But I've read all sorts of stuff. I'd say, you know, epic fantasy or, you know, sword and sorcery, you know, really anything within the fantasy genre. I like the urban fantasy genre. I think it's a fun genre, you know, if you're talking, you know, Jim Butcher or, you know, Patricia Briggs, stuff like that. So it's fun, and doing it, I think, in, you know, modern setting, gave, you know, I felt it was more relatable, because of that, and the whole going through the, you know, university process, is something very relatable, and, you know, maybe hopefully reaches a lot larger audience.
sure, sure. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I like that you reference it's fun. And if if it's fun and it feels good, then your writing time could be very enjoyable. And you say that you started with kind of fooling around in different genres and now you've pretty much landed. What's the big umbrella? 100 Halls?
Yeah. That would kind of, you know, to term it the Hundred Halls universe, and
All
then,
right.
you know, have a series name for each series, and then I've
For each
also
piece.
breaking it up
Yeah.
into seasons. So season one was 28 books, which was five-book series, and then I did a three-book trilogy that brought all the characters from those five books who really didn't interact for the most time in those series together for kind of an Avengers style trilogy that, you know, was a culmination of all the little things that have been going on amongst all those five books. And again, I try to write them that each series is its standalone and its own thing. You can pick up and read that series and not know anything about the others or the world or, you know, anything like that. But for the fans that want to dive in deeper, they can go through, you know, all the series and kind of see the big picture and, you know, read that, you know, the end of season one, the Order of Merlin, and then right now I'm working on season two. I've got the first series
Okay.
out of that, the Crystal Halls, and right now I'm writing the second series, as we speak, which I'll
Okay.
launch in the fall.
Okay. And when you write, do I have to read the books in series or can I pick up any one of them and be current
Um, in Within a series, they need to be read in order.
in order?
You know,
Yeah.
one through five,
Okay.
because it is the, you know, that character's progression and the school year. There's 5 years in school. Um, and which, you know, kind of going back to your earlier point about, you know, the writing part of it, I picked 5 years for that because in my experience in writing longer series, I felt that was always a good spot. Like I could tell a good story in 5 books, and once it started getting beyond that, I felt like I was stretching it, you know, like when you're watching a TV show and you're like, yeah, they probably should have wrapped it up at season four, and now we're on season six, and I don't know who these characters are. You know, when they have to, when a series starts having to change everything to keep you interested, it was probably time to end it. So that's why I did the five.
Okay, all right, that's great. How many years have you been writing? You've got 35 books, is it? 35, 36 books?
In a total of 60 books published, and I've probably
Total.
written 70 books. So you know, my I started writing my first book in college. I got an engineering degree because while I knew I wanted to be a writer, I knew that that's not a thing that just, you know, happens to be a novelist. You know, that you kind of have to toil away while you're doing a different job to figure it out. Um, you know, I wrote that first book. There were parts of it that were okay, but, you know, generally, like most first books, it was pretty terrible.
Right.
Wrote a couple other books during that time. I think, you know, I wrote 3 or 4 books, and was, you know, looking for an agent. I unfortunately got an agent, and I say unfortunately because it proved that it was not a real agent. Back in
Ah,
the early days before we had and even now it can be confusing for new writers, is you just had the publishers, writer marketplace thing, and found an agent, or, was sending it out and got an answer. And eventually this agent asked me for money for fees and stuff. And I had no idea. And I sent some money. And then after a while, I realized maybe this wasn't a real thing, and never heard back again. So
wow.
that kind of that kicked me in the teeth for a bit. And then we had kids and other stuff. And then it wasn't um, till it was like in the early 2000s, through work, I finished an MBA, and my wife, Rachel, said, "Hey, you managed to squeeze out an MBA in 18 or 15 months. Why don't you take some of that time you used to do for studying and go back to writing like you used to? Because I know you've been wanting to get back." And I was like, "Oh, that's a great point." So I started doing that, and really, found a writers group, and you know, started writing some short fiction and sending it out, and then started working on novels, and then published the first novel in 2010. And then after that, I've pretty much been steadily, increasing and growing from there.
Okay. And are you still practicing as an engineer or are you strictly writing now?
No, I was able to leave. I worked for Toyota for 25 years. Able to leave in
Ah,
2.5 years ago, and when I moved out to BV, was when I was able to go full time, which was
okay. Okay.
a dream come true.
Yeah, living the dream, right? Yeah, I think a lot of us feel that way. That's a lot of material. That's a lot of thinking. And so what are your writing habits, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah. So I try to write every day. Um, And obviously you can't write if there's something else going on, I will take a day off. But I pretty much write 6 days a week usually. That's my
Yeah.
usual. And sometimes even, I'll have 20, 25 day stretches where I'll write every day in a row. If I'm, got something, really important I need to get done. And I think, from that, I get up in the morning, knock a few things out and spend a couple hours writing, and then we'll go on a walk for lunch, and then I'll come back. I might do a short writing period in the afternoon, or honestly, these days the amount of marketing and other stuff you have to do with indie publishing means that I do sometimes have to spend the afternoon doing that kind of stuff rather than more
Right.
writing.
Right.
Um, but those are the writing sessions. And then between that, like when we go on a walk, I might bring up a thorny question I've got with Rachel while we're walking, and she's really good at asking me questions to help me uncover what's going on. Or I might spend some time in an afternoon just writing notes for the next day. I have been outlining more thoroughly recently, and that's been a
Oh,
nice change. I used to only do a very rough outline and then kind of go from there, but I tended to get stuck a lot, where I'd get to a point and then be like, "Oh, I really got to go on a walk because I got to figure out what's coming next." But for the last three books, I've actually taken about a week or two ahead of between books, and plotted out chapter by chapter every detail with a
oh,
like a good 10-page outline, where maybe before I'd just write like a 1-page summary of what was going
sure,
to happen.
sure.
And that is
Yeah.
really, that's been a revelation for me. I never thought I would like to write that way, but it's been good. I happened to be on a flight, and like they had the James Patterson master class was on there, and he talked about his outlining. I'm like, I'm going to give it a try. And after the first one, I'm like, oh, actually, I really like this, because I feel like I still change things, as you run into things. I'm like, that chapter doesn't make any sense. Why I need to do that, or I can combine these two chapters in the same one, or if a character, if I realize that it's not what a character would do, then I'll have to change things. But it's given me a much better path for the output, which has been good.
Well, it sounds like, writing is such a creative process, but yet you need discipline. And then, of course, you referenced the marketing that we have to do. I, it's such a challenge to harness those two things together so that they pull you forward. It sounds like this outline thing really has been helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the other thing, and you talk about the, the creative and the discipline is on the creative side. I think sometimes people think ideas come out of a vacuum and they don't. There is
Um,
you can learn, you can be disciplined at creativity. And the basic thing is you have to fill the tank with new ideas and things that will help you when you get to those points. If a blank page is imposing, it's probably because the writer hasn't done enough preparation ahead of time. When I'm
yeah,
preparing for
good
a new
point.
book, I'm doing lots of reading, I'm doing lots of thinking about it, I'm doing deep dives on subjects, like this 5 book series. I'm playing with a lot of the Celtic myths and a lot of the stuff with the fae and Seelie and Unseelie. So, I spent a lot of time reading a lot of that stuff and still do, just to, keep the mind full with new ideas and stuff like that. And I mean, it just doesn't have to be specific to whatever I'm working on. Even, watching, there's so many great shows on TV right now, like Shogun. If you're watching that, if you're not, you should. It's phenomenal. But the way they're having dialogue without saying anything, like just in their glances or in their
Right.
the way they're doing ceremonies or other things. There's just so much information there, and it's as I'm watching, I'm thinking, okay, how would I do this? How do you do this on the page, and how do you do this in my world rather than that?
I get to,
Yeah. So
yeah,
there's always, you got to always be constantly, filling the brain with those ideas. But I also sometimes have to remind myself, I'm not trying to write what they're doing. I'm just trying to learn a lesson that I can apply to my own stuff. And
right.
sometimes, that can be hard as well. Cause I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
that's really cool. But I don't want to, shift what I'm writing off towards what they're doing. I want to keep it in my own voice, but still take that lesson.
sure, sure. And that's a way of kind of dipping into others' creativity and what they've done. And maybe the thinking will be different for you. Yeah, it definitely works. What about your character development? Because it's so strong in your series.
I think, well, the key to good character development is before you've stepped onto the page, before the character steps onto the stage of the novel, you have to understand them thoroughly. What are their needs and wants? Within that outline, I have a section for all those characters where I write about them. And I really, ahead of time, especially like once I'm in a series and I've established a character, it's easy. But ahead of time, I really have to figure out who they are, what they like. And I just spend time daydreaming. Like I'll go on a walk and think about, one of the main characters of this current series is Remy Wild. She's a former con woman and other things, and ends up at the university because she's trying to pull off a heist, and things change, for her. So, having to get into that and reading about the mindset of somebody who does that. What's the terminology of somebody who's pulling off cons with people,
Ah,
confidence games and stuff like that, and also just within the world, things are different, so that does change things. But it's really just understanding them so thoroughly that I know what color socks do they like to wear, what do they like to eat. Like,
oh,
even though I might not have written that, if I'm not just naturally thinking of that, when things come up, then I know I haven't done enough research into that character. And actually, I had a failed novel this summer where was supposed to be this series. This series, I started in a different first book, And I'm not sure where I went wrong, but I didn't know the characters enough, and my setup wasn't correct, and I really struggled for the first half of the book. And I thought, well, maybe it's just I'm struggling because it's a new book. And after I realized, I'm just struggling even to like make decisions for these characters and within the world. And I realized I just had gone off on the wrong path and I wrote a whole book that I had to scrap. The good thing is I learned a bunch of things that like I kind of gotten away from, and I'm like, okay, I need to get back to here's where my books tend to be. I had gotten too far afield, and also I didn't know the characters enough, and because of that, it just never felt right. And I guess I had gotten to enough experience where I realized I couldn't fix it. I just had to scrap the whole thing and start over. But it was definitely the best decision. It was a painful decision, to set aside whatever
Yes.
78,000 words of work. But I have zero regrets.
Yeah, yeah. In the long run, yes. And the same is true even if you finish a chapter and you look at it later and go, no, line
Yeah,
through, it's gone. It's
yeah.
delete, delete, delete. It's
Yeah, actually, this
painful.
morning I was doing that. I was writing a chapter and I realized this is an unnecessary chapter. Like, this is just a, as you know, Bob chapter, and I didn't need to do that. It was kind of so I was like, okay, there's like two information points I need to get in here. I cut it out and just moved to the next chapter. I'm like, I'll weave it in there, but I was like, there's no tension in this chapter. It's pointless. It's just characters talking to each other, stuff I want the reader to know that they already know, and it's like this is
Yes, reiterating, yeah, tell it again, tell it again, tell it again. No, stop, stop, stop. Well, you mentioned, a few minutes ago, people getting started. Do you have a piece of advice from all your experience and 70 books later? What's your piece of advice for someone toying with the idea of publishing?
um don't toy, do there's a weird thing in the writing community, not everywhere, but I hear it far too much, is that people tend to think of writing in the art form as like a delicate thing that you only get one shot at doing and that's it. If you look at every other artistic endeavor, they practice, 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 try, fail, 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 and keep doing it over and over. The great painters would paint the same painting multiple times, trying to figure out how to do it how they wanted. And they would paint and they would paint and they would paint. Musicians practice all the time, 8, 10 hours a day. Sculptors, the same thing. So you have to write and you have to be willing to fail. And actually, you need to push yourself in directions that will lead you to failure. I've sold a lot of short stories and I've written far more short stories than I've sold. But you kind of they're difficult and you got to figure things out and you have to be willing to fail. And I think I've written, like I said, published 60 books. I've written close to 70 or more than 70. I've got 6 or 7 or 8 that I've trunked, I've scrapped. And I don't feel bad about those. Like I was just saying, I learned something from that book that I wrote. And I know that's daunting for people who are new to writing because even the accomplishing and finishing a single book is a huge task. I remember how it felt that very first one, or even the fifth one or 10th one. It still felt monumental when you don't have the experience, the discipline, and all those other things. So, but I think people get worried that they're going to write a thing, they're going to send it out, and then they're going to get feedback, and they're going to and then they're going to give up after that because they got negative feedback. Well, the reality is your first stories, your novels are not going to be good. And the key is to expect failure and to learn from that fail forward. Write something not as it's going to be the best thing ever, but write it as I'm going to write this to learn what I need to do for the next one. And to be okay with those failures. I think that is the biggest thing. Repetition, repetition, repetition. It's actually we're watching a YouTube show. There's a comedian, Mike Biglia. I don't know how I'm saying his name right. Anyway, he interviews other comedians, and they were talking about the difference between the great comedians out there, like when they do these specials that really do well, like John Mulaney, Bill Burr, or something,
Sure.
and the lesser ones that are coming up. And the thing they say is they always can tell when that comedian hasn't done enough repetitions. Like the great ones are constantly going out and getting on stage and failing and having like, oh, that joke didn't work and that joke didn't work, and getting to the point where they can put together enough for a killer show. And I think that's the same way with writing. You have to be writing and developing all those skills until you get to the point where you can put it all together. There are so many different skills and things you have to learn to construct a novel that's going to be so good that the reader is gonna not be able to put it down.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love your comment, fail forward. Learn from our mistakes and hang in there. It's like, yeah, yeah. And we've all been there, done that. We've all failed and lined through the entire book, like you said.
Yeah, and I like I said, with the short fiction, I think I have something like 1,200 rejections for my short fiction. Yeah, and from the early years when I was sending out novel queries to agents and editors, I probably got 300 or 400 of those. So I think that's the thing. You got to have tough skin, and you got to just keep going despite. Yeah.
Well, thank goodness we have email, so you don't have to buy stamps to
Oh
mail the
yeah.
letter and wait for it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was that definitely made it a bit more challenging.
Yeah. Well, good. Thank you for that. We really appreciate that. And just knowing about your experience and everything that you've written is just really golden information. I appreciate it. We're kind of to the point where we have a few minutes. Could you maybe take a couple of minutes and read from something that you've written?
Yeah. So I brought I know you mentioned that ahead of time. So I brought Shadows and Amber. So this is the first book of the Crystal Hall series, which is the first series of season 2. Again, it's each of these series can be read on their own.
Right. Good.
And the entire 5-book series is out. And I will read, it's like the first 2 pages of the opening of the first chapter.
All right, great. Let's hear it.
The shadows moved, not the kind of movement that the clan brothers and sisters called the flicker, which surfaced during the long watches when the mind grew restless. Kuma would have asked Carlos if he'd seen it, but he'd gone for a piss 10 minutes ago and was probably nosing around the ladies at the bar in the pale sun. No, this was a different kind of movement, the kind with teeth and claws, or maybe a knife. Kuma reached for the curved blade in his jacket, wishing guns weren't forbidden in the Torino. If he were a Waku, it wouldn't matter as much, as he'd be able to wield stones that would make him powerful. Even an amber stone, which would give him the capacity to see in near darkness and hear a single drip of water from caverns 2 away, would be enough for him. For now, anyway. Certainly he'd wish to be like his uncle Brazio, who carried 4 stones. No one carried more. Kuma leaned forward, studying the shades of darkness that permeated the caverns, looking for the glint of whiteness that he'd seen briefly at the edge of his vision. There were 3 kinds of shadows, all of them dangerous in their own way. The first held the quick death, creatures born of the Undercity or people living on the edges that hunted in the darkness. These shadows were the easiest to avoid, or frighten away with numbers or light. The second was at his back in the Torino, the shadows that flowed from great men and women like his father, or the head of the drops. When inhabitants of the Undercity spoke of the clans, or RZR, they were speaking of his father, Niran Santos. Since the discovery of the stones and the forging of the Waku, his power had grown. So too had the power of their rivals, the Drops, and even the smaller clans that operated in the northwest regions. Now their shadows reached above ground, where the power of mages in the school no longer held the sway that it had before the awakening. The people that lived above them called it the invasion or the sundering. While it had brought trouble and lesson for them, It had been a boon for the clans, even if the Undercity was more dangerous now. It was the reason the clans had come together on this evening, to end the petty battles and divide the Undercity between them, so each could gather profit on their own terms. The final shadows were the ones his father said held the greatest danger, the unknown, the shadows behind the shadows, and the reason Niren had reached out to the other clans to make a deal. The discovery of the stones had brought interest from outside the Undercity. It was these shadows that he said would prove to be the biggest danger, best to bulwark their defenses while they had time and space. But it was the first shadow that was threatening Kuma now. He kept his back to the passage, not wanting anything to sneak by him, even as he desired to creep forward to investigate the shift in the darkness. It would be a blow to his honor if he, the clan leader's son, let intruders into the Torino during this critical night.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. And once again, what is the name of that book you just read from?
It's Shadows and Amber. It's book 1 of the Crystal Hall series.
All right, that's great. Thank you very much. And I wanted to also publicly thank you, Tom, for all the support of the Central Colorado Writers group. It is appreciated. Your expertise is so valuable and you are so helpful. Thank you
Well, thank you.
for all of us fledgling writers out there. We appreciate it. So thank you for that.
We're all struggling, so.
You bet. We struggle together in this
Yes.
whole endeavor. And for all of our listeners out there, this has been Tom Carpenter at the kitchen table today. And please stay tuned. And we look forward to seeing you all on the next episode. Goodbye for now. Thanks for listening to this informal conversation with today's author.
Join us next time as we connect writers and readers around the kitchen table.